Welcome. Today we're going to learn how to use Xero's webhooks with PHP. You're going to need a few things in order to do that today. You'll need a local server. I'm using Apache through XAMPP. As you can see, I've got my server currently running. That's how I'll host my PHP files. You will also need the Ngrok tool in order to monitor the traffic between the webhook and your server. If you don't have that already, you can go and download it. Just head over to ngrok.com/download and get the appropriate version that you need onto your machine. And the last thing you're going to need is this sample code that is available on GitHub. It was created by a developer in Xero's community, so huge thank you for posting this up on GitHub. And let's go ahead and download this source code. I'm going to go ahead and drag that out of my download folder and unzip it. And inside here you'll find a source folder. I'm going to drag that into my web root, and I'm going to rename the folder webhook. Next thing we're going to want to do is take a look at our PHP code. You can open this up in whatever IDE you prefer. I'm going to use Sublime Text. All right, so let's take a quick look at the code that we're working with today. On line 18, you can see that we are getting the raw payload. This is the data that's being posted from Xero's webhook to our PHP file, and we want to capture that. We also want to get a webhook key, which you'll see in a little bit how we go ahead and get that from Xero's app.xero.com. And once you get your payload and your webhook key, you can generate a computed signature key, which you will then match to the Xero signature key that we include in the header from that post. When you take those two and you compare them, if they're equal, then you return a response of 200 with nothing in the body, and that will validate that the webhook was successful. If you don't match, then you're going to return a 401, which confirms that there was something incorrect in the payload. Now, this is Xero's way of making sure that you actually are correctly accepting webhooks from Xero and not just from anyone. There's more in this code that involves debugging, which you could choose to use, but when I tested out the code, I found that I hit a permissions error and wasn't really aware of that it was happening, and it has to do with line 85, where it outputs the file to my file system, and Apache didn't have the ability to or the permissions to write to that local file. So I'm going to go ahead and just comment that file out, because we're going to use Ngrok to help us do our debugging. So I think we're good to go here. Next step, jump over to app.xero.com to create our app and set up our webhooks. So here I am on app.xero.com. I'm going to create a brand new app. Now, it's important to note that webhooks only work on private and partner apps. You can't use a public app, because webhooks are meant to receive messages or events, and then you're supposed to make an API call to go and get the rest of that data. Since public apps access tokens only last for 30 minutes, webhooks wouldn't be very useful with those kinds of apps. So I'll create my app. Let's call it Webhook Demo. The organization I'm going to choose is my test organization, and the last thing I need is a public-private key. I've already created one, but if you need to, you can head over to developer.xero.com and look for creating a public-private key pair. It'll give you all the instructions you need to use OpenSSL to create the public and the private key that you're going to need. Now, this won't be necessary for webhooks, but it is necessary to set up your app, and it will be necessary in order to make API calls based on the webhooks you receive. I'll go ahead and create my app. And we're done. You can see we've got a consumer key, some configuration information, but what we're interested in is the webhooks tab at the top. and you can select whether you want to receive contacts or invoices or both types of events. Now the next thing we need to know is where do we want to have our webhooks post to, what endpoint? And since I'm running this on localhost, I need some way for Xero servers to talk to my laptop basically. So that's where Ngrok comes on in. So if I jump back to my terminal and I run this command here, it's going to launch Ngrok, and I can see here that it's forwarding my local host to this URL right here. So I'm going to copy that, jump back over to Xero, I'll paste that in there, and we're in a subdirectory called webhook, so I'll add that, index.php. Go ahead and hit save. Now our webhook is set up and I now have a key, so let's copy the key and then jump back to Sublime Text so we can paste our key in here. I'll hit save, and that's all we need to do. We should be ready to go, so let's give it a test. In order to test your webhook, you do a send ITR, intent to receive, and if I want to see if any traffic is making it through, I can go to Ngrok. And there we see 4 API calls were made. One returned to 200 because the payload was correct, and the other 3 returns 401s because there was something wrong with the signature. So that's a success. Now, what if I want to actually trigger a real webhook call? Well, if I want to do that, I want to actually go into the org that I'm connected to, and I want to edit, let's say, a contact. So I'll go into Acme Corp, I'll hit edit, and I'll call it Jimmy Jones 123, and I'll hit save. If I jump back to my terminal, I'm going to have to wait a minute, and there's our 200. So the webhook was received and it returned a successful message. But I can't really see what's going on with the webhook, like what was the message I actually got, what was the payload, and that's where the Ngrok web interface comes in handy. So I'm going to copy that URL, go back to my browser, hit a new tab, and paste that in. And here, the very first, the one at the top, that 200 OK, I can see that it's giving us a event category of contact. It was an update, and the resource ID was 4F91, etc., etc. If I jump back here, that was 4F91 is the contact ID up here. So that's the one that was modified, and now I can turn around, I can hit that contact API endpoint. Here's the actual resource URL I want to hit, and I can pull down all of the information about that contact that was changed, and perhaps update my local database with that information or take some other action. So that's really it. That's all you need to do to get up and running with webhooks and PHP. Have a great day.